Hey, what is up guys? Welcome back to Life on the Wrist. Hope you guys are doing well today. There's so many watch complications out there that we haven't discussed, but we do have a series where we talk about watch complications. We give you some information about how they're set up and the different complications you can find in watches. Today we're going to be covering the date complication. I know this sounds very rudimentary, but I think it's something that I want to cover because there are different variations of the date complication that you can have, and it can make your watch seem very different than another watch that has a similar complication. So that's the complication we're going to be discussing today. But before we get into that, if you haven't already, be sure to smash that like button for us, for the YouTube algorithm, as well as subscribe to the channel if you like these types of videos. So the date complication, there's not much to explain here. It shows the date of the month. It basically will tell you what day of the month you are in, and you can basically set it to whatever date that you want. A good example of this is actually on this Omega that I have here. This Omega has a date complication at 3 o'clock. So you can see there, it is the 1st, and I can tell you I'm filming this on the 1st of November, and that is essentially what a date complication can look like. And so there are many different variations of how you can have the date displayed on the dial of your watch. This one has a date window, so it's basically what it describes. It is a window on the dial and it displays the date. But there are other ways that you can display them as well. Some of them include a big date, which is where you have a much larger view of the date, and oftentimes they have a window that it's displayed on, but it's much bigger and it takes up a lot more of the dial. What comes to mind when I think of big dates is the Lange Lange 1. They have quite a large display date on their dials, so that's another way that you could do it. Oftentimes on those big dates, if you look at this date window, the date is displayed on one disc. Essentially how the date is displayed is there's a disc underneath the dial of your watch, and the gears in the movement move that date every 24 hours. And so the disc that has that day ends up shifting. So the next day that will be displayed is the 2nd as 24 hours goes by. But on the big date, oftentimes they actually have two separate discs, one for the first digit of the date and the other for the second digit of the date. And so those move in tandem. So let's say it is the 1st. My big date, if I had a big date complication on this Omega Genève, the left disc would display a 0 and the right disc would display a 1. And that's kind of how a big date is displayed. So that's another way that the date complication can be laid out. The third most common way is a pointer date. This is often very common with vintage Jaeger LeCoultres, and I think there's some modern, I want to say Orises that have this. I could be wrong there, but the pointer date basically describes a date where there is an additional hand that points to where the date is on the dial. Oftentimes there is a date ring that runs around the outside of the dial, and then you have this pointer hand that essentially moves every 24 hours to a separate date. So you can imagine on this watch there would be a 1 up by close to kind of between 1 and 12 o'clock and 1 o'clock, and you would have an additional hand that would be pointing to that 1. I actually like this. This is sometimes called the banker's date. I think it just has to do with the types of watches that bankers back in the day used to wear, and I like it. I actually like having that additional hand, and it kind of adds another level of depth to the dial. And then kind of the last, most common date that you can find is where you have an actual dial for the date. And so on these types of watches, these are subsidiary dates. So you can imagine having kind of a subdial on the dial of your watch. And again, you would have a let's call it a circle for now. But you'd have a circle which displays all the different days of the month, and you'd have a small sub-dial hand that would point to that date. This is different than the pointer date complication because it is on a subsidiary dial, not just on the full dial itself. I think these are tricky. The subsidiary dial date functions are very difficult because I think sometimes if you have so many subdials with all these different complications, it can cloud the watch a little bit, and it makes it very difficult to read. But you can also do this very, very well. And I would say, like, if you have a watch that just has hours, minutes, and seconds and date, like, that can work. But you want to make sure that you're not adding complication for complication's sake, and you're not clouding the dial too much. That's my kind of like biggest not pet peeve, but I don't like when the dials are too complicated. I will say that the functions that I have described have to do with mechanical watches, not so much digital watches. So I should probably just caveat it there. Another thing that I thought is kind of interesting is the way in which the date can be set. Most of the time, on date watches, you actually have a complication where you pull out the crown once to set the time, and then again to you pull the crown out once to set the time, and you pull the crown out a little bit further, and you can set the date. That's probably the most common way, but you can also kind of go through and let the movement change the date by simply moving the time of the watch forward so that it progresses through 24 hours and then changes it. One of the things that I think is really cool about this watch, and there are different ways that you can adjust the date function on other watches. One thing that's cool about this Omega Genève is that this has a 613 Omega movement in it. And the way that you actually adjust the date on this, besides having the time roll forward and allow for the date to roll forward with it, is that you actually pull the crown out, and that progresses the date forward. So I thought that was a really unique way of setting up the way that you can adjust the date on this watch. I don't think this is a very common way of doing it. I personally, this is one of the first movements that I've actually experienced where that is the way that you do that, which I think is really, really cool. There are probably other ones. Let me know in the comment section below if there are other watches that have that way of adjusting the date function by pulling out the crown, and that progresses the date forward. But there are many other ways. A. Lange & Söhne is very, very well known for actually having a button on the side of their watch that you can press, and that progresses the date forward. Some of the common problems that some people have is there are some movements where you can actually ruin some of the gears that are in your movement if you do not set the date, or if you progress the date at a specific time. I think a common thing is you want to make sure that the time on the watch, I basically go to the next morning and I want to make sure that the hour and minutes hand are below the 3 o'clock, below 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock. So anywhere between 3 a.m. and 9 o'clock a.m. is when you want to set the date of your watch. This is because I think if you end up, the wheel that adjusts the date on some of the modern movements actually grinds up against I think the time, and so you can actually end up ruining the movement that way. So it is a common practice to make sure that the time, if you are progressing the date forward, to make sure that the time that's on your watch is between 3 and 9 o'clock in the morning. So just a helpful hint there if you are looking to adjust the date on your watch. Again, this is a very simple movement. I know this isn't this is probably not the most complicated, pun intended, because this is a complication that you can find on your watch, but this is oftentimes combined with other complications. A very well-known one is the day-date complication, where you actually have the day of the week as well as the day of the month on the dial of your watch. Everyone knows the Rolex day dates. But this can be combined with like triple calendars, or it's part of a triple calendar. You can have, obviously these are part of perpetual calendars. It's just a complication that is very simple but can be added with ease. Some people think that this is the most useless complication ever because you do have the day of the month on your phone or on your computer, so there really isn't a need for it, but I really like it. I think you can have some very interesting variations of it too. So I hope this helps you understand the date complication that can be found on mechanical watches. Let me know in the comments what your favorite date complication watch is. I would love to hear your thoughts on that. Also, if there's a complication that you would like to see us cover, we're going to try and get back into this series a little bit. We took a little bit of a hiatus from it, so we'll get back into it. Let us know in the comment section below what complication you want us to cover next. And with this said, guys, thank you so much for watching, and until next time.